Good evening, YouTube. Welcome back to the channel. This is IMAX Sports with another football video, and today I'm going over my Week 5 power rankings for the 2023 NFL season. Crazy how we're already at Week 5. But at this point in the season, we're starting to get to the power rankings where I feel a little bit more confident that we kind of know where teams are. But there's still a lot of question marks, so let's get right into it. First off, we have tragic. I had this in here last week for the Bears and the Broncos. This week I decided to keep it in here. The Bears are at 32, the Broncos are at 31, the Panthers are at 30, the Jets are at 29, and the Patriots are at 28. The Broncos stayed at 31. They did beat the Bears, but it was a 3-point win. And the only reason why they won is because somebody had to win that game. So if they win another game, then they'll move ahead of the Panthers. But just because they have a win and the Panthers don't does not mean that they are equivalent, because the Panthers never played the Bears. And the Panthers are at 30 because they're 0-4. Those three teams are very clearly the three worst teams in the league. And then the Patriots and the Jets are somewhere around there. The Patriots, obviously, this week lost their biggest game under Bill Belichick. And the Jets have just been horrendous since week 1. They did beat the Bills week 1, but I think a lot of that was just pure willpower to win the game after Aaron Rodgers' injury. There's just a lot of tragedy here. The historic losses for the Patriots and the Broncos, injured quarterback for the Jets, the Bears existing. Yeah. Moving on, we have the dumpster fire. We have the Raiders, the Bengals, and the Giants. The Giants have not played yet this week. They play on Monday Night Football. So technically, if they do win on Monday Night Football, they would move significantly higher in the rankings because the Seahawks are a strong team. That being said, I don't really expect them to win based on how they've played so far this season. All three of these teams are terrible. The Giants did win one game against Arizona in a very strong comeback win. But other than that, their offense really hasn't been able to do anything. The Bengals, who I expected to be a Super Bowl favorite, are 1-3, and their only win was last week. And it was a decent win, but they need to do anything offensively. They haven't been able to do anything offensively. They've been just horrendous. The Ravens game was a close game. That was their only other decent game of the season. But the Bengals have been immensely disappointing. And then this week they lost to Tennessee 27-3 after the Titans have had a pretty not great start to the season. As for the Raiders, the only win is against the Broncos, and it was a 1-point win. So it's hard to put them a lot higher than 27. Moving on, we have some glimpse of hope. We have the Falcons, the Steelers, the Vikings, and Washington. The Falcons are moving down the list every week, but they still have some glimpse of hope. The last 2 weeks, they've put up a total of 13 points. This week, they lost to Jacksonville, and last week, they put up 6 and 7 points the last 2 weeks. They started off very strong offensively. I believed in them, but since then, they have really fallen off. They're 2-2. They don't look great. They need to get another win going and start getting their offense back in it for them to move up the rankings from 24. At 23, we have the Steelers, also 2-2. The Vikings are the only team here that's not 2-2. With the Steelers, they started off, again, fairly strong. They lost week 1 in a pretty bad game. But the last 2 weeks, they were good. The 2 weeks after that, they were good. They beat the Browns, which is a very strong team, and then they beat the Raiders. This week, they had their worst performance since week 1, and it wasn't close. So they kind of actually stayed where they were in the power rankings because other teams moved below them. But I think that 23 is a pretty fair spot for them. The Vikings have just had a juggernaut of a schedule. They lost to 3 of the best teams in the league. In the Eagles, the Buccaneers, and the Chargers. But the Washington, their only win is to the Panthers this week, and I need to see them beat somebody other than the Panthers for them to move up. I don't expect them to move very much until week 8, honestly, because their next 3 games are against the Chiefs, the 49ers, and the Bears or something. And so, they're gonna go 1-2 in those games, and they're gonna be 2-5, and they're gonna stay around the same spot because none of those, like, those games they're either gonna win or they're gonna lose because of who they're playing against. So I don't expect them to change much. And at 21, we have the Washington Commanders. They are 2-2. They look really good and really bad at the same time. They looked really good this week against the Eagles, but they got demolished last week against the Bills. Their first 2 games of the season, they won both of them, but neither of them were very impressive wins. So they're 2-2. They've looked good in 3 games, but 2 of them, I don't know if they really count, because the Cardinals game was before the Cardinals found themselves, and then the Week 1 game was against either Denver or the Bears. So the Washington Commanders, 21, I think, is a fair spot for them right now. At 20, we have the Arizona Cardinals. The Cardinals are 1-3, but they have the best win here. They beat Dallas. They beat the Dallas Cowboys. Their other losses were to Washington and the Giants the first 2 weeks of the season. I think that if those 2 games were weeks 3 and 4, they would have won them, honestly. But they were weeks 1 and 2, and the team hadn't gotten used to the rhythm yet. This week against the 49ers was a rough week. They lost 35-16, but I think that they can bring it back together, bring it back in next week, and maybe start stringing together some wins. They look pretty decent, and they don't look like a 1-3 team. The next 4 teams are all very, very, very confused. We have the Saints, the Packers, the Titans, and the Colts. The Saints are the definition of every single game is going to be 17-17, and you're going to like it. This week's variation of that, they got blown out. But at least Alvin Kamara is back from injury. So yeah, they looked pretty bad this week, and they lost to the Packers by 1 last week. So between those 2 games, they've moved down significantly in the power rankings. But their defense has been fairly consistently strong until this week, and their offense has been okay. The Packers are 18. They beat the Saints, but they got demolished this week. It wasn't even close by the Lions. 34-17. It just was never a close game at any point in time. And although the Lions are a better team, I expected a little bit more fight out of the Packers. Jordan Love looked okay. Well, he didn't really look that great. He looked like he was by far his worst game of the season. But they are still They're still 2-2. They still have chances to improve, and they're at a decent spot right now. With the Titans and the Colts at 17-16, both of these 2 teams have been extremely bipolar, but the Colts have been the most consistent team so far out of this group. They beat the Ravens last week. This week they lost a very close game to the Rams, who are one of the better teams. They beat Houston, who at the time didn't look like a very impressive win, but since then Houston's been very strong. And then the first week of the season, they lost to Jacksonville, but that was kind of expected at the time. So the Colts have been the most consistent team here, which is a little surprising. And if they could win a game next week, then they could potentially be considered a very good team, honestly. Moving on, we have This Is Interesting. These teams are all very interesting. We have the Browns, the Jaguars, the Texans, the Chargers, and the Rams. The Jaguars being here, I think, is a little bit of preseason bias seeping in. Usually by week 5, I try and take out the preseason bias, but this week the Jaguars had an impressive game. It brought them back from the dead a little bit because I really thought that they were trending in the wrong direction a lot. But the Falcons were a strong team going into this week, and they had a very strong game against the Falcons. So I think that 14 is a fair spot for them right now. The reason why the Browns are at 15 is because of Deshaun Watson's injury. They lost very badly to Tennessee, 27-3 this week. And because of that, it's because most of that was because of Deshaun Watson's injury. They really couldn't do anything offensively, and I think that hindered them a lot. With that being said, when Deshaun Watson comes back, if he comes back next week, they'll move back up in the power rankings, but for right now, they're at 15. At 13, we have the Houston Texans. The Texans have looked phenomenal the last 2 weeks. They beat the Jaguars 37-something 2 weeks ago, and then last week, and then this week they won another game by scoring over 30 points. Houston's looking very strong, very, very, very good. CJ Stroud possibly looking like a potential top 10 quarterback right now. Not like top 10 in the league, but like based on performance for the season, he's been a top 10 quarterback based on performance for the season. He's played extremely well. He's been phenomenally good. Nico Collins, Tank Dell, they're good players. Their receiving core is very strong, and the Texans defense hasn't been bad. They've been very consistently decent. So Houston's trying to turn around. They've won 2 games in a row by very large margins, and they're looking good. The Chargers and the Rams. The Chargers are just going to stay at 12. I don't really expect them to change at any point in the season. If they win against a team they're supposed to beat, they're going to stay at 12. If they lose to a team that they're supposed to lose to, they're going to stay at 12. That's just where they go. I think they started up my preseason. I don't think they've been any position other than 12 all 5 weeks this year. That's just who they are. They're a team that's going to make the playoffs they're going to be in the playoff chances every year. They'll either almost make it or just miss it, and they will probably lose in the first round. That's just kind of who they are as a team. And then for the Rams have looked extremely impressive. They beat Seattle week 1, which I think a lot of people expected was a fluke. And then week 2, they lost to the 49ers in a very, very, very close game. That game was way too close for the 49ers' comfort. It was 30-23. And then I was a little bit disappointed last week when they lost to the Bengals. The Bengals obviously have not been a good team this year, so a 19-16 loss obviously is a close loss. Can't hurt them too much for it. But they should have won that game, and then this week they came back and had another very strong game against the Colts. The Colts brought them to overtime, but they were able to convert in overtime. Rams have been one of the best offenses in the league, and their defense hasn't been bad either. I think 11's a fair spot for them right now. Next up, we have the strong contenders. We have the Buccaneers at 10, the Ravens at 9, and the Seahawks at 8. I think everybody else on the list from now on is 3-1 or better, except for Seattle, who's 2-1. Tampa has had an extremely interesting season so far. They've had some strong wins. They beat the Vikings. They won this week. I forget exactly who they played. My apologies. But Tampa's had a pretty decently hard schedule, and they haven't done poorly with it. The Eagles game last week was fairly close, and they're 3-1 with the hard schedule. Definitely deserves a top 10 spot. Their offense has looked really good, other than the Eagles game. The offense looked horrendous in the Eagles game. But Tampa's looked like a pretty decent team. Should they be at 10? I'm not entirely sure. I think that there's a little bit of debate there, but I think that being 3-1 with how people expected them to be this season deserves a top 10 spot. The Ravens can't really put much stock into this week. They beat the Browns without Deshaun Watson. Was it the Browns? I'm tired. I think it was the Browns. But Ravens win this week wasn't super impressive. They kind of stayed where they were. And the Seahawks haven't played yet, so they're staying at 8. If they lose to the Giants, they'll probably drop down to 9. I think they're still better than the Buccaneers, even if they lose. But I don't expect them to lose. Moving on, we got Elite Junior. We got the Dolphins at 6, and we got the Detroit Lions at 7. These are the junior teams of the Elite. Miami was number 1 last week, actually, for a brief moment in time. They jumped from, I believe, 5 or 6, all the way up to 1, and then back down to 6. All that was because they got demolished by the Bills, 48-20. I thought that Miami was trending in the right direction. I thought that their offense was going to be some all-world record-setting offense. It still could be, but this was a really bad game against Buffalo. They got demolished. They got owned, and they just looked really bad this week. As for the Lions, they had a very impressive game. They beat the Packers, and they beat them 34-17. Packers are not a bad team. I've been a big Lions supporter recently, so I'm happy to see them doing well. And last but certainly not least, we have the NFL's Elite. We have the 49ers back at 1 after the Dolphins' brief stint at number 1. We have the Eagles at 2, the Bills at 3, the Cowboys at 4, and Kansas City at 5. Kansas City beat the Jets this week. They beat the Bears last week. They beat the Jaguars by like 8 the week before. And the first week of the season, they lost to the Lions. They're basically in the top 5 because they beat the Bears by a large margin of victory and because they have Patrick Mahomes. Obviously, week 1, they were missing Travis Kelce and Chris Jones. Since then, they've been playing well. But Kansas City really has not played like the best team in the league this season. Are they a top 5 team? Of course. but they really haven't played like it so far. Hopefully they will start to look more like Kansas City in the next few weeks. The Dallas Cowboys and the Buffalo Bills have had very similar season trajectories so far. They've both lost one fluke game. The Bills lost to the Jets when Aaron Rodgers went out, and the Cowboys lost to the Cardinals, even though that's a little bit more of a legitimate game because the Cardinals are a legitimately decent team. In their wins, they've both been utterly dominant. The Cowboys, I believe, are plus somewhere around 70 or 80. They beat the Giants by 40. They won by 20 against the Jets, and then they won by another insane number this week. And the Bills, over the last 3 weeks, are 120 and 30. They've scored 120 points, and they've allowed 30, or something around those lines, maybe 124 to 34 or something. They've been plus 90 the last 3 weeks against a pretty difficult schedule, including the Dolphins, who are one of the best teams in the league, and the Commanders, who have looked very strong in every single game they've played except for the Bills game. Buffalo has an argument for number one because of how insane they've played against strong teams. The only thing is that they lost that week 1 game, and Josh Allen's inconsistency with turnovers puts them at number 3. The Eagles and the 49ers are the only 2 teams that are undefeated right now. The Eagles have been very consistent. They've had a little bit of shaky situations. The Patriots game was shaky at points. But for the most part, they've been a very consistent team. Their offense hasn't been as good as the 49ers, but it's been very strong. It's been a top 10 offense, and they've had a top 10 defense as with last year. Very strong team. And, of course, at number 1, we have the 49ers. The 49ers are just an unstoppable force on offense. It's wild what they're doing offensively. And with the consistency that it is, it's insane. They haven't played too many very strong opponents, so I'm curious to see how they continue on the season, but they've been playing well. So, thank you guys for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.